there is a lot of misconception about India's high tariffs. Actually, the tariffs are not all that high. The World Trade Organization has calculated that the applied average tariffs for India are only about 7%. And the World Bank, for the last 3 years, has come out with a figure of 6.3% only. But this includes compensatory duties for the domestic excise duties or manufacturing tax. It has been calculated that India's average basic customs duties are between 1.7% and 2.3%, which is very, very low indeed. As far as Harley-Davidson is concerned, of course, there are a few tariff lines which account for about 4.6% of India's total tariff lines, which are above 10%. And motorcycles, auto components, etc. are there. But they account for a very small proportion of our imports. And even if the tariffs were to be lowered, the increase in imports wouldn't be all that much, because we ourselves have a booming auto industry, including that for two-wheelers.
You know, if you're saying that...
yes.
You're saying that there is a misconception that India's tariffs are very high, but that's a claim that's being made by the US. In fact, the USTR over years has held that same claim. In fact, the USTR has described India's tariff system as complex, characterized by a lack of transparency. So as we now start trade negotiations under the Trump administration, and if this is the point of view of the Trump administration, how do you see things progressing?
To start with, I think this misconception will have to be cleared away, and we will have to explain that the way tariffs work, our tariffs are actually between 1.7 and 2.3% if we exclude the domestic, the compensatory tariff, which is put in for domestic manufacturing tax. And then we have to discuss what are their trade concerns, because even if we take the average tariffs, applied tariffs, for our imports from the US, they are less than the average applied tariffs for the whole world taken together. Because from the US, we are importing a lot of raw materials, intermediate products, for which the duties are really quite low.
You know, do you believe that this business of high tariffs can be used as an excuse to open up negotiations on other fronts, for instance, IPR? And there's absolutely no secret that this has been a contentious issue. While over the past 2 years, maybe there has been some degree of convergence, but that's not a point of view of the US Chamber of Commerce, for instance. So do you believe that high tariffs, the claim of high tariffs, could open up other fronts as well?
I think we have to tackle each of these issues separately. High tariffs, we have to take them up and explain, and let there be a very free and frank and open discussion on this. And we will be able to persuade, because we have all the figures with us, and the World Bank and the WTO itself has substantiated the points that I have just made. And I'm quoting from their figures. On the IPR front, of course, the US has several concerns. One of them, of course, is about the grant of data exclusivity under Article 39.3 of the TRIPS agreement. Now, that is a WTO agreement, and we will have to negotiate it, any modification in it multilaterally. It is the same with regard to tariffs. We can't give any concessions to any one country outside of a bilateral or a plurilateral FTA. It has to be done multilaterally.
It has to be done multilaterally, but that's not a system that President Trump seems to put too much weight on. We don't even know the fate of NAFTA, given the Trump administration's multiple calls on wanting to do away with NAFTA itself. But, sir, you know, in terms of reciprocity, and we've heard President Trump speak very often of free trade, but at the same time wanting free trade agreements to be fair deal agreements. In terms of reciprocity, what is it that you believe the US may ask of India?
Well, there are a few aspects which have been part of the US's interest One of them is in agricultural products. And there we have serious concerns because in our case it is not a trade issue alone. It is a matter of livelihood security and food security as well. So there are issues on agricultural tariffs. On industrial tariffs, I don't think the US has really been asking us to reduce tariffs in a very serious manner. In the WTO, there were demands from the US in general of all developing countries to reduce tariffs on electronic products, on machinery items, and on chemicals. Now, we have to take them up sector by sector and see how far they are justified. And the point is that if we were to, hypothetically, if we were to give a concession to the US, we'll have to extend it to the rest of the world as well under the WTO disciplines. And there would be other competing countries which would perhaps be more competitive. China, for instance, Korea, Japan, the European Union, Brazil in many cases. So even if we were to reduce the tariffs, let's say, multilaterally, it would not really serve much of a purpose because there would be other competitors who would take advantage of it and send their exports into India. So it has to be taken up, I think, on a holistic basis, and it has to be within the framework of the WTO, multilaterally.
Okay,
and
let me end.
For everything in the WTO. Yes, please.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
No, I just wanted to say that in the WTO or in the multilateral forum everywhere, there is a question of reciprocity. I'm going to give you some concessions.
Yes.
The rights and obligations that we have negotiated so far and which are at a standstill in the WTO, if we want to change anything, there has to be a balance and there has to be reciprocity. If I'm going to give you something, you have to give me something equally valuable.
So let me end then by asking you, on the back of whatever you've heard so far from the Trump administration as far as trade is concerned, we've got a bunch of global auto CEOs talking about NAFTA, and they're concerned about what we're hearing from the Trump administration as far as NAFTA is concerned. What would the key challenges be as India and the US try and negotiate under this current administration?
I think one of the issues of concern to us immediately is the issue of movement of natural persons, which is mainly IT professionals and other professionals on short-term visas who go to the US to service contracts there. Now, that is going to be a matter of concern, and I think NASSCOM has already raised that issue. Apart from that, there will always be some outstanding issues here and there from both sides, and they will need to be resolved across the table. And we have the India-US Trade Policy Forum, which has been doing a very good job of it for the past 10, 12 years. So there are institutional mechanisms to resolve trade problems, trade issues. And if there are any major changes that the US wants in the WTO or elsewhere, that will have to be negotiated. And not only with India, but with all other partners.
Well, Mr. Dasgupta, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18 and taking us through what you make of the claims of the Trump administration that India has notoriously high tariffs. That's not a claim that you're willing to accept. In fact, you're saying that our tariffs are quite low. In fact, the Trump administration's proposed border tax has topped